Hello and welcome to the Fit for Privacy podcast. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you learn from the best. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. I help business and privacy leaders to create and deliver strategies for privacy compliance and trainings. Before we start, a quick reminder that the opinions and ideas shared in this context are not legal advice. If you need advice, you should contact a professional with your specific context. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Punit Bhatia and I welcome you to the Fit for Privacy podcast, where we have a special guest who started the career in managing data privacy, data governance and data management when GDPR was not even a four-letter word. And she has, so now you know that it's she has 20 years of experience in different firms, Dun & Bradstreet, Cisco and Moorcroft, and so on. And she uses the knowledge and experience to guide organizations through their data protection journey in different ways. She's direct, to the point, and importantly, get things done. I'm talking about Tash Whitaker. Tash, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, tell me your story about how did you get into privacy so early on?
It's just when I'd say I got into data very early on rather than privacy. Privacy is something that has always been there on the sidelines for the last 20 years. And obviously in the last 3 or 4 years has become the absolute pivot of what I do. But I've been in data right since I left university. The story behind that is slightly unusual in that I did an English literature degree. And I was living in Wales at the time, in Cardiff, and it was very difficult to get onto the career ladder in Cardiff if you didn't speak Welsh at the time. If I wanted to work for the BBC or any of the larger organisations, there was always the requirement to speak Welsh. And so I found it very difficult to get a job when I left university, and we'd already bought a house in Wales. So we didn't intend to move at the time. So I just had to find something to pay the bills. And I had done various telesales jobs and things like that. And there was a job going in the local job centre in the days when we had job centres that was telephone work, but it paid £5 an hour, which was way more than anything else in Cardiff at the time. And so I avoided it because I thought it must be sex lines. So I was like, no, I'm not working there. And then it got to the point where I was like, do you know what? I have no choice. I need a job. So I contacted this one. It turned out not to be a sex line. It was working for Dun & Bradstreet in their new call centre. And it was before call centres properly existed. The Welsh Development Agency had got money to set up this brand new thing called a call centre. And we were on the phone for 4 hours a day updating business information. And so that was sort of my first foray into data. And I just discovered I absolutely loved it. And I went from that to sort of coaching the call centre team, managing the teams, and then eventually moved to High Wycombe, to their headquarters, and did project management, quality management, and so on. So ended up just being knee deep in data, right from day one. And it was certainly nothing I ever intended to do, but just found that was my niche. And at the time, if anyone asked what you did for a living, it was impossible to explain because no one got data. Working in data was just so boring. And I used to meet up with people at conferences who I still work with now, who are very, very big in the data protection space. And we'd be talking about data protection. And, it was just not spoken about anywhere else. The only time it was at conferences with like-minded people. So to see the difference now of how things have changed, and data is no longer geeky, data is the place to be, and it's all the things that we were talking about behind closed doors with people like Dara O'Brien and people like that at the conferences is now completely mainstream. So It's been a massive change.
It is. And then how would you describe GDPR in one word?
Difficult. There was, when GDPR first came out, there was a lot of talk of this is a evolution, not a revolution. That was the ICO's big saying. And I completely disagree, because whilst there were companies who were doing the basics of GDPR. They were doing the right thing with data. And there's a lot that weren't. But, if you consider there are companies that were doing it right, what they weren't doing was documenting everything that they did. And there is a lot of documentation required for GDPR. The new ICO accountability framework that they've put out is about 300 questions of, have you done this? Prove it. Have you done that? Prove it. And you look at the things that you have to document to be accountable and have a defensible position, and it's massive. So when people say, oh no, it's just a continuation, I disagree. I think this has been a massive burden on firms. And I think to a certain extent, with the lack of enforcement by the ICO, that has led them to believe, well, why should I bother? And that's a real shame. So it is a lot of work, and there doesn't seem to be, from their perspective, a what's in it for me, because it's a difficult one.
Indeed. And one of the challenges that now small businesses have is they're still not compliant, and they are like waiting and watching what will happen. Should we do it? Should we not do it? So what would be one advice you would give them to solve this biggest challenge? Like, should we invest in it? Should we not? And of course, the administrative burden is high, but for them, I think it can be really quick and simple also in some cases.
Yeah, I would say no one is compliant. I don't think it's just small businesses. I think the large businesses are actually a bit worse. I work with a lot of small startups, and they are further along the compliance journey than a lot of the big companies I work for sure. The advice that I tend to give the smaller companies is get the basics right. If you're a small company, it's actually quite easy to document your data processing flows, because quite often the managing director or the key contact knows the answers. In a large organization, that can be a 2-year project, just putting a ROPA together. So whilst a small business doesn't technically need a record of processing, you need it as part of your foundation to do anything else. So if you can just document that and you know what you're processing, writing a privacy notice is really easy off the back of that. Knowing what the rights of the individual are, you don't necessarily at this point have to have a written policy and procedure. I know that the ICO says you do, but as long as you're doing it right, and if you needed to, you could retrospectively write it because you know what you do.
Exactly.
So, I tend to be very, very pragmatic on the small businesses, but I actually think it's a little bit easier for them to comply than it is the large, complex companies.
Yeah, I think it's easier for them, but it's also challenging for them to find the right person who can tell them, because typically they get into lawyers, and I don't have anything against lawyers. I mean, of course, you're also a lawyer, but
I'm not a lawyer.
You're not? Okay.
I'm not a lawyer.
So sometimes they tend to get into the complexity of, this is the list of 100 things you have to do, and that's not the way. It needs to be simple, pragmatic, and useful.
Exactly. I normally put a roadmap together that can take anything up to 2 years, but get the basics done first. If everybody is trained, and they understand GDPR, then you're not going to go far wrong with anything you do.
Indeed.
That's the key for me.
Yeah, and sometimes these small businesses, like I had one last week, asking me, okay, just tell me how much it will cost. And I said, I wish I could give you the cost. It can cost you anywhere between £500 to maybe 50 million, depends on what is the size and scale of your company. So you need to tell me, what do you do, what data you have, and maybe after half an hour, I can pinpoint which side you are tilting, the £500 or the 50 million pound. Of course, you'll be towards the 500, but I can't pinpoint it's in thousands or where it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So they have this struggle to understand that there are so many nuances.
Yeah, and quite often, you can go through the accountability framework with them, which is a really good way of working out what they do and don't have. And it's not until you've done that and you've got a list of all the actions that are needed that you can actually say, okay, based on this piece of work will likely cost this much, but this is the priority order. So
indeed,
just do the right thing, when you need to, rather than trying to do everything up front. And I agree, it doesn't need to be as complex as some lawyers make it. Not all, but some.
No, not all. Yeah. But I think it's also for some people, it's their business. So they tend to look at it as, how can I make more money? But that's not the right way.
No.
And then, I mean, from a DPO perspective, there's sometimes a debate. I also put in a post last week saying DPOs should have technical skills or not, of course, you probably read it, that my opinion is you don't need to be technology oriented, but you need to be understanding technology. You need to be able to understand different aspects as a DPO and then be able to advise. And of course, if you need, I mean, each one of us is differently skilled, differently blessed. So if you think you need to know a little bit about technology and want to do a course, go ahead and do it. But you don't need to become an expert in technology. But what is your view and what do you tell your clients about that?
I tend to work on the idea that the most important thing is that you know the business. So although I work as DPO as a service, I insist that I am embedded completely in the business, that I totally understand it. So I will do the ROPA for an organisation, so I can ask all those questions, so I can completely understand what they do. I don't necessarily understand exactly how the app works, for example,
Right.
but I know what questions to ask
Yes.
to the IT team to get the answers I need, and I know when they're lying to me. So
Yeah.
they're the things that I think are important. Saying that, I would desperately like to know more about technology. I mean, I want to learn everything. That's just the nature of me. I like to know absolutely everything, but I would love to be more technical. And even for things like cookies, there is so much you could get into the weeds of cookies that I would love to know more and completely understand, well, why is that cookie being dropped when all the settings say it shouldn't be, and be able to have that technical mind. But instead, I make sure I'm surrounded by people that do understand these sorts of things and that I can go to and talk to. I rely quite heavily on Carl Gottlieb, for example, for things like that, because he gets stuff like that really, really well. And he's very good at explaining it. So I have a network that I can go to. Or if the company I'm working with has a very, very competent IT team, I can work with them. And it's about making it very clear to them, talk to me like I'm 3 years old. We've got to be able to explain this to the average reading age of the UK, which is 8. So if you can explain it to me like a 3-year-old, then we're probably part of the way there. So it's being honest about what you do and don't know as well.
That's true. And I think you are putting the challenge a little bit too high. I normally say a 5-year or 7-year-old can understand, but you're making it 3 years old. So that's even more simpler than what most people do.
Yeah.
Now, when we are working with fellow colleagues, some of them say share different challenges, and of course, I can share what challenges I hear. But what are the biggest challenges you are hearing in terms of DPOs that you talk to in the networks, because you speak at a lot of conferences, just like me. You are also an active speaker, and you're also active outside of your job. So, what do you hear on a consistent basis?
So I have 2 Slack groups that I run, one which is a very small closed group for DPO as a service, and one which is an overall data protection colleagues and support network. So I do see a lot of behind the scenes. These are things that are coming up. We're seeing a lot about Schrems at the moment, and the idea that a lot of US companies think they can just do standard contractual clauses and walk away now. And and a lot of companies are fine with that, but you get someone like me who's quite pedantic about it. It's like, no, I need to do this due diligence. And I think we feel like we're hitting up against a brick wall against some of these US companies at times, because they're like, well, everyone else has said it's fine. It's like, well, I'm not saying it's fine, and I need to do this due diligence with you. So that's coming up a lot. Also, the other thing that comes up is what software should I be using? That comes up all the time. The company wants to invest in privacy software. Which one's best? And it's like, well, it depends what you're going to do, how much money you've got, not just to purchase it, but also to manage it. And then the other one, which is not necessarily a data protection thing, but I see coming up all the time for DPOs, is imposter syndrome. It seems massive in our industry, and whether that's because I very rarely meet an extrovert DPO. I think that it's the nature of the work that we tend to be introverted, because I think there are sort of some parts of introvert personalities where you get into the weeds, you like the detail, and that's why we're good at what we do, because we can translate that detail, because we've had the time to really drill down and shut everything else out and then bring it up for other people. But I think a result of that is we are quite isolated. It's rare to have. Some companies do. Some companies have a whole team of DPOs, but it's rare to have someone else doing the same job as you and having sounding boards. And like, you can say something and a company will say, no, that's wrong. Or you can even say something to Google and Facebook and they will come back and go, no, you're wrong. And you're like, am I? And it's very easy to start questioning yourself. So we need the network of people around us to bounce ideas off, sanity check things with each other, but also be there as support, especially during lockdown. Those groups have been invaluable during lockdown. You just get someone saying, I'm having such a bad motivation day, I cannot get up and do anything, and others be like, yeah, me too, and I've got so much work to do, have a little bit of a chat, phone call maybe, and then we carry on, so I found that has been really, really valuable. So long answer to a short question, sorry.
No, it's okay. And I think it's challenging. I worked in a company wherein we were 50 plus and all of us were DPOs. And so that was like amazing because you have a network within the company itself. And I've also worked in a company wherein we were 4 of us. And I've also worked in where there was nobody and I'm the only one. So there's a variety, and based on where you are and what you are doing, it really depends how much of support network you have. And if you don't have it in your job, like when I had 50 people around me in different countries, it was very easy because I could go and lean on anyone's shoulder and say, I'm thinking this, and they could lean on my shoulder, and it was much easier. But you need this network. We also have this similar thing called the DPO circle in Belgium, and another privacy network that I'm part of.
So
these are important support systems you need to create.
Yeah, definitely. Because there are so many things where it can feel like, I know that I would struggle working in-house for that reason, because there are so many times that you do feel that you're butting up against a company, particularly the marketing teams. You can be working with the rest of the organization, no problem at all, but the marketing teams, their role in life is completely apathetic to the GDPR. They make their money by doing stuff that the GDPR doesn't want them to do, and so you're constantly up against them. And whilst you can say as much as you like, I'm not saying no, you can't do it, but I'm saying we have to risk assess what you're going to do first. Like, no, but I want to go and make money for the company. And it can be very difficult when it just feels constantly like a conflict. And I find that a little bit easier being DPO as a service, because I can just sort of step away and say, okay, I've given my advice, I've documented my advice. If you don't follow it, that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to be offended. I've got plenty of things to get on with. That's fine. But if I was in-house, I think I'd find that very difficult. I take it very personally. So I think, it's a difficult job without a good network around you.
Indeed, it's very difficult and sometimes very challenging, even in the reverse context. I had an instance a few months ago. There was a marketing team who asked me advice, and I said, okay, you can do it, provided you do this, this, this. And a few hours later, I got an email with the copy of GDPR text, copy of Telecoms Act, and the copy of a few more articles saying, no, we cannot do it. And that's from the head of marketing. And I said, okay, if you knew all this, you didn't need to ask me. What I'm giving you is assimilating all the information and giving you practical advice on how you can get it done. So I didn't say, if you want to be black and white, yes, you cannot do it. What I'm saying, if you do this, 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 the risk is reduced, and then you can always do connections and everything. And it was in COVID. So obviously everyone is looking for clients. So I paid attention to that part. But it's funny how our market is, because DPOs themselves have different opinions, and sometimes business also comes back with their own knowledge or own understanding of the law. Like we cannot, the typical one is, we cannot transfer data because of GDPR. I mean,
no, I agree. And I think the one I had a few weeks ago, I was contacted by a company I hadn't worked with before, and they had wanted advice because a journalist was snooping around them. And I looked at why the journalist was snooping, said, yeah, you've got a problem, and this is what you need to do about it. And this is the response to give to the journalist, because they'd asked me to write the response. Right. This is the response to write. And it was a very, very transparent response. We've got this and this, but this is how we're working on it. This is how we're addressing it, and so on. And they came back and said, oh, we've spoken to our PR team and they don't like your response. We're just going to reply with data protection is very important to us. And I was like, no, that line just screams out to me, no, it's not. And needless to say, I haven't done work with them again because
Of course.
that's not the ethos that I work with at all.
No, it's a common thing. I mean, it sounds like uh, everyone I speak to, we have common examples. I mean, I also had the same instance. Somebody complained, probably a journalist, and I give them a reply and they say, no, but we already replied. And I said, what did you reply? Oh, we said, thank you so much. We will look into it. And I said, what will you look into it? And then I give them the advice on what to change and say, that's too much. That changes our business model. And then after that 2 hour session, they never contacted me, or I was also not very keen because they don't want to change things and they just wanted a validation of what they've already done. But you can't get a tick in the box.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very fussy about working with companies like that. They have to have the right culture. Otherwise, I can't work with them. And I would quite happily say, no, not for me. I'll move on. And because of that, I only work word of mouth, which means that a lot of my clients all know each other from the various startup groups that they're in and things like that. And that's quite a nice feeling that you've been recommended and you know already that the company is going to have the right feel to it and going to want to do the right thing.
Absolutely. And we were talking about the data transfers, and you also talked about the Schrems case being frequently talked about in the DPO circle or DPO events. Then what are the actions that you are seeing or recommending in context of Privacy Shield invalidation? Because, I mean, from my perspective, you will not stop. Yes, it's a situation we didn't want to be in, but you need to find a way out, risk assess, and get things
absolutely
organized.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the purists are saying, well, just don't transfer to the US. And I disagree with that. You can't completely change your business because something that was in theory legal yesterday is not legal today. That doesn't seem particularly fair on the business. So what we have to do is look at the risk-based approach. And the way that I'm addressing it with my clients is we're looking at everybody that was using Privacy Shield, checking that they're now using standard contractual clauses and signing them if need be. Some of them are already integrated or some of them we'd actually already signed. And then I did start with the questionnaire that none of your business had provided to do due diligence, but most of the processors didn't understand the questionnaire. So what I'm doing instead is once we've confirmed the standard contractual clauses, I'm just asking the very simple question. It seems simple, but the back and forth on it is horrendous of what is your policy if the US government asks for the data? Right. And based on the answer that they then give, if they say we don't have a policy, then that's obviously a red mark, and then depending on what their policy is, the risk changes. I then create a matrix which is okay, they have standard contractual clauses or they don't. They have a policy which seems to be, close enough, they want a subpoena or something like this. So that gives them a score of this. Then we look at what's the type of data that they're processing, the sensitivity of it, the amount of it, and give a score against that. And then we put a set on of how critical is this to the business. Yeah. And then is there another supplier that we could use easily? Could we switch them out easily? And that gives us a large matrix. And off the back of that, we make the business decision, or rather the business does, because I don't, of saying, based on this score, we will continue with this provider. We won't continue with this one. We will continue with this one. And on the whole, there's only been a couple of small providers that, have been changed with all my clients. Most of them we've been able to keep, but we've been able to document why we're keeping them. So that's how we've addressed it.
I think that's a very simple and structured approach, very similar to what I'm using. But anyhow, it's very structured. And the idea is to give business the risks on a page or in a few slides saying this is the risk and either accept it or then make choices.
Exactly. Yeah.
And talking about then another thing which kind of we don't want to talk, but Brexit. I mean, what are you recommending to your clients in terms of Brexit? Because there are things which some of these things are clear, but some of the things are not so clear. We can go the either extreme saying UK will be a third country and then prepare, or kind of wait and watch. What are you recommending?
So we are making sure we know what data transfers we have coming from Europe so that we're ready to put standard contractual clauses in if we need to. So at the moment, that's the sit and wait, just be prepared. Obviously, if there is an adequacy agreement, those things won't matter. I personally don't think there will be in time. If there is, I'd be very dubious about why there is one. But, if there is, there is. We're looking at, are they processing data of European individuals, and do they have a location in Europe already? And if they don't, do they therefore need an EU representative, if it's not occasional processing? Or would they actually be better creating an entity in Europe, which is, a big question at the moment, because the concept of an establishment in Europe, doesn't have to be significant, that establishment. It has to be doing something, but not a huge amount. And it may well end up being better for a company to do that than to have an EU representation, because EU representation still isn't 100% clear where the liability lies, whether they're a controller or a processor. So we're looking at that. What else? I do have a checklist, but I can't remember everything else on it. But it's very much those things. They're the big ones that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think the simple message is you can't solve it right now, but you can be ready to solve it. So knowing what are the things to change, what are the things to look at, because at that moment you don't start which contracts we have, because then you'll take another 6 to 8 weeks to find out, while now is the good time to make that inventory.
Yeah, there's also the fact that, things aren't expected to happen on day one. Yes, we are supposed to all be ready for January the 1st, but is the ICO going to do anything about it? Probably not. It's possible that the other European DPAs are going to do something about it, and they may be waiting ready to spring. I just hope, fingers crossed, by the grace of God, that it's not on my clients. So
no, I hope good sense would prevail, and if just one day the jurisdiction changes, it doesn't mean the data protection in that jurisdiction changes.
Yeah, I hope.
But we don't know that.
No. I think it's slightly concerning, that a UK company could, in theory, be fined by the UK ICO, but also then each of the DPAs in Europe should something go wrong. So I think firms have to be aware that there is the potential of a double whammy fine, which we didn't have before.
Yeah, but theoretically there is, and there can be scaremongering around that point. But what I've seen in last few weeks or months is even DPAs have been very reasonable and sensitive, like the ICO reducing the fine for British Airways and Marriott. And that shows a lot of compassion and understanding of the situation. Of course, it also sends a confusing message on did the severity of breach not matter.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with the ICO fines was that they were built on flawed calculations. Okay. And had they not reduced the fines, that would have been a massive issue, and it would just gone on and on and on. So yes, they are talking about, being a little bit compassionate, but I'm a little bit skeptical about that. I'd love to think that was the case, that they were being pragmatic and everything else, but I suspect there was more behind it. And at the moment, there has just been so little ICO enforcement that, we don't know what's going to happen in January as a result. And, a lot of the decision making there moves to the Secretary of State for data protection. So we don't know whether things are going to get harder in the UK, or harsher rather in the UK, or even easier. Because every so often you get a politician saying, okay, well, we're going to scrap the GDPR. It's like, okay, I don't think it quite works like that, because we've got the UK GDPR coming in. So, yeah, it really is just a wait and see, along with everything in these uncertain times.
Yeah, and it would be surprising because most laws in the world are being based around the GDPR principles. And in fact, the Data Protection Act of 1998 reflected a lot from, GDPR reflected a lot from 1998 Act. So it would be surprising to say, now that we are not in EU, we would completely revamp and go a different way.
Exactly.
But who knows? These are decisions which we don't control.
Exactly.
Now, as DPOs or as privacy professionals, we are to ensure that the staff remains aware of all their responsibilities and obligations. While in a small startup company with a handful of employees, it's simpler to do that. But in large corporates, it's a challenge. And that was one of the reasons I came into entrepreneurship, because I wanted to solve that. But how can DPOs, in your view, remain aware that how much of their staff knows, and how do they keep staff aware in an effective manner? How do you ensure that, or advise to ensure that?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult. The way that I do it with my organizations is I insist on being on all their Slack channels, because
Okay.
that way I spot when things are happening, and when I realize that someone doesn't understand what they're meant to be doing.
Hmm.
We also send out questionnaires that are based on the NHS toolkit,
Mm-hmm.
which helps to assess the level of knowledge across the organisation. And so that gives us an idea of where there are things which might be missing in knowledge, and we can change them. But it is very difficult. I had a couple of companies who were using, for example, the Draft It system for training that
Mm-hmm.
got withdrawn from Europe last month. And so suddenly we're left in a situation of we don't have a training provider. We now need to completely redo
Mm-hmm.
our new training plans, find a new provider and things like that. And so I'm spending a lot of time at the moment looking at the new providers, what they can do. And you get some companies who historically are cybersecurity education providers who
Right.
say they do data protection, and they absolutely don't get it.
No, they don't.
And yet they're not happy for someone like me to look at the courses before I buy. And I don't
Yeah.
get that at all, because how can I assess if that course is going to work for my client if I can't actually see the content of it? So
Right.
it's a very, very difficult one, because finding the right education provider, and I think Bob's Business do it quite well when they do a sort of survey up front, which works out which people are the ones most likely to fall for phishing and things like that. And so
Yeah.
they tailor it based on the results of the very first survey they get back. And so there's a little bit sent throughout the year then that people have to do. But online training, it's pointless. It really is. As much as I'd like to say it works, you speak to anyone that's done online training, and I'm terrible for it, I would just flick through it, and then
Yeah.
answer the questions at the end. People do not do online training the way it's designed to happen. Even if you insist that you sit there while it does the 5-minute video, you go and watch something else, or go and do something else for those 5 minutes, and then just click next. So
Right.
there's a massive market there to get this right, and I don't know the answer. I really
Yeah.
don't.
I think there's no one size fits there. I mean, if you have workshops, then people don't turn up. If you have online trainings, they do next, next, next.
Yeah,
And if you do surveys, then also half of the people don't reply. So you have only half the story, and you
yeah,
don't know which half replied, the good half or the bad half, or maybe the mix.
yeah.
But you need to do everything in your, I mean, in your vision, and do it consistently, not like once a year. That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah, it's got to be constant. And that's why I quite like the Slack thing. I will quite often just ping out, pop quiz on Slack. Who knows where your privacy notice is? Who knows this? Tell me the answer to that. And depending on, the engagement, because I find that a lot of the companies I work with are very, very into Slack. So it
Mhm.
works quite well doing it that way. And also other people can see them responding. So
Mhm.
it's sort of a peer pressure thing to respond as well. But yeah, like I say, I don't know the answer. I think it's a
Yeah.
$1 million question as to how do you get people to understand things like this. Health and safety has worked, but how many years has that taken? And then people like me will still stand on the desk to change the light bulb. So
Yeah, it's like compliance. We've been in, I think, 20, 25 years in that journey, and still a lot of people don't know what to do, what not to do, what's ethical, what's not ethical, and they make
yeah,
mistakes.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's wonderful to have you. And in essence of time, as we close this, may I ask you to share your one final message to people in terms of data protection, how to make sure that things go right, whether they are in a company or they are a privacy professional or willing to learn, maybe combine that message?
Yeah, I think for DPOs and privacy professionals, I think it has to be keep learning.
Yes.
Read as much as you can, work out which sources you trust and learn from them. I have a few key people on LinkedIn where I know that what they say is gospel. So Phil Lee at Feel Fresher, for example, I will devour anything he writes because I know that it's going to be right. And I keep an eye on everything that goes on in Europe, because if one DPA is doing one thing, you need to understand why they've come to that decision and apply it then to your business. So you can't just do a CIPPE and think you know everything. We don't know everything. We've got no way of knowing everything. You just have to keep learning.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's continuous learning, but you also said doing CIPP does not make you a good DPO. Rather, you need to put the time and effort on the ground, and then you become a good DPO.
Exactly. And listening to others and having the conversation with others and challenging each other. I'm more than happy to be told by my peers that I'm wrong, because then I learn from it. And I think there was a lot of, when GDPR first came out, there was a lot of not wanting to put your head above the parapet because people would shoot you down. You're wrong. You don't know what you're doing. You're new to this. You shouldn't even be doing this or this sort of thing. And I don't think that was healthy. I think that led to a lot of people not necessarily having the discussions and the arguments that they need to, because sometimes there are weird nuances. I can remember a really good one where I was talking to a company who was based in the UK. They were a processor. They were working with controllers in the UK, but one of their employees who had access to the data was based in Australia. Now, that probably took 10 DPOs about 4 hours of arguing before we all agreed, do you know what? That means the data is being transferred to Australia. You need to have standard contractual clauses in place. But it was a proper, full on, yes, but this is what this bit of legislation says, and this is what this bit says. And without that fully rounded argument, I am now completely happy with that decision. And that's what I would use going forward, because I know that I had the input from all those people with all those different viewpoints, and we collectively came to the answer. So, there's always room for argument and discussion, and sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. But sometimes you need to have that argument to get to the right answer.
Yeah, I think dialogue with other peers and other colleagues, and also with business, that's the only way you can get to a consensus.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or the right decision, or the best decision, if not the right decision.
Exactly, and it always has to be the best. I say the best decision for the business. That has to take into account the data subject as well, clearly. But you can't spend millions if you're not making millions. It has to be, comparable to the type of business that you're in and the risk that you're happy to take, because we could all build a Rolls Royce, but actually a Mini might do, in which case just build the Mini.
Indeed, and I think it's a balanced decision while keeping all aspects in mind, but end of the day, the business must be able to do business.
Yeah, exactly.
So if somebody wants to contact you and says maybe they want to get in touch with you for advice or whatever, what's the best way to reach out or contact you?
It's on LinkedIn. I don't have a website because I only work word of mouth. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to contact me.
Okay. So Tash, it was wonderful to have you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this effort. Please do click like, comment and share. It is okay if you did not like it. Please still do make a comment and share with us what we can improve. If you have suggestions, ideas for guests, or you want to have your question answered, please email me. My email is info@punitbhatia.com. You can also share this with others, and if you do so while tagging me in, I will personally thank and acknowledge your contribution in coming episodes. Thanks once more, and look forward to seeing you back. Till then, stay safe, stay blessed and stay happy.